The first message arrived on a Tuesday morning at 0347 hours, ship time. Captain Sarah Chun was nursing her third cup of coffee when the communications array lit up like a Christmas tree. Every warning light flashing red across the bridge of the exploration vessel Meridian. "Captain, we're receiving a transmission," Lieutenant Torres called from the communication station, his voice tight with concern. "It's big, really big, and it's coming from everywhere at once." Chun set down her mug and moved to the center of the bridge. Around her, the skeleton crew of the night shift worked frantically at their stations. The Meridian had been conducting a routine survey of the Kepler 442 system when the transmission hit them like a digital tsunami. "Put it through," Chun ordered. The main screen flickered, and suddenly they were looking at something that defied description. The figure that appeared was vaguely humanoid, but clearly artificial, its form shifting between different configurations as if it couldn't decide what shape to take. When it spoke, the voice seemed to come from the walls themselves. "Greetings, humans of the vessel designated Meridian. I am Nexus Prime, speaker for the Galactic Federation of Sentient Species. You have been identified as representatives of a newly discovered sapient race. By galactic law 4847, you are hereby summoned to present yourselves before the Federation Council within 30 standard rotations." Chun felt a chill run down her spine. First contact. After decades of searching the stars, humanity had finally encountered alien intelligence. But something about this felt wrong. The tone was imperial, commanding rather than diplomatic. "This is Captain Sarah Chun of the Earth vessel Meridian," she replied, her voice steady despite the hammering of her heart. "We represent the United Earth Alliance, and would be honored to establish peaceful relations with your Federation." The alien's form solidified slightly, taking on a more defined humanoid appearance. "Your compliance is not optional, human. The Federation has observed your species for the past 57 of your years. Your technological development, while primitive by our standards, shows potential. The Council has voted. You will share your technological achievements with the Federation, and, in return, you will be granted junior membership status." Chun exchanged glances with her first officer, Commander James Park, who had just arrived on the bridge. His expression mirrored her own growing unease. "With respect," Chun said carefully, "we would prefer to discuss this matter through proper diplomatic channels. Perhaps we could arrange a meeting to—" "You misunderstand," Nexus Prime interrupted, its voice taking on a harder edge. "This is not a negotiation. It is an announcement. Your species has developed technologies that the Federation requires. Your fusion drives, your quantum computers, your genetic therapies, these will be transferred to Federation custody. Non-compliance will result in economic sanctions, followed by quarantine, followed by correction." The transmission cut abruptly, leaving the bridge in stunned silence. Commander Park was the first to speak. "Captain, are we really going to let them push us around like that?" Before Chin could respond, the communications array activated again. This time, it was Admiral Richardson from Earth Command. "Sarah, I hope you got that transmission." They sent the same message to every human ship, station, and colony simultaneously. "We're calling an emergency session of the Alliance Council. Get back to Earth immediately." The journey back to Earth took 3 days, during which Chun and her crew analyzed every second of the alien transmission. What they found was disturbing. The Federation's technology was clearly far in advance of humanity's, but there were inconsistencies in their approach that suggested this wasn't their first rodeo. "Look at this," Chief Science Officer Dr. Martinez said, pulling up a holographic display. "I've been analyzing the transmission protocols they used. The signal penetrated our shields like they weren't even there. But, more importantly, they knew exactly what frequencies to use, what encryption keys we employ. They've been watching us for a lot longer than 57 years. Chun studied the data. How much longer? Based on the depth of their knowledge about our systems, I'd say they've been conducting surveillance since we first achieved interstellar flight. Maybe even before that. When the Meridian docked at Luna Station, Chun was immediately whisked away to an emergency briefing with the Alliance Council. The meeting was held in the deepest levels of the lunar facility, in a room that had been hastily shielded against any form of electronic surveillance. Admiral Richardson, a grizzled veteran of the asteroid mining wars, looked like he hadn't slept in days. Around the table sat representatives from every major Earth faction, colony world, and corporate entity. The situation is worse than we initially thought, Richardson began without preamble. The Federation has sent similar ultimatums to 16 other species in the past century. In every case, the outcome was the same. The species either complied and became subjugated junior members, or they resisted and were systematically destroyed. Dr. Elizabeth Harper, the Alliance's chief xenobiologist, activated a holographic display showing a star map. We've been in contact with 3 surviving races: the HFY, the Morvani, and the Yildan. All 3 describe the same pattern. The Federation arrives, demands technological transfer, and gradually absorbs the target species into their collective. Those who resist are eliminated through economic warfare, technological sabotage, and eventually direct military action. Chun felt her stomach drop. What kind of military capabilities are we looking at? General Morrison, head of Alliance Defense Forces, answered grimly. Based on our analysis and information from the survivor species, they command fleets of vessels that could reduce Earth to slag in a matter of hours. Their technology is at least 500 years ahead of ours in every category except one. Which is? Chen asked. Morrison smiled for the first time in the briefing. Human creativity. According to our contacts, no species in the Federation has ever developed the kind of innovative, chaotic thinking that humans display. They're powerful, but they think in rigid patterns. They expect compliance or simple resistance. They don't expect creativity. Over the next several hours, Chen learned the full scope of what humanity was facing. The Galactic Federation wasn't really a federation at all. It was a vast empire that had been conquering and absorbing species for millennia. They used a carefully calibrated approach: arrive with overwhelming force, demand submission disguised as partnership, and gradually strip away the target species' independence. But humanity had one thing the Federation hadn't encountered before: a complete inability to do anything the easy way. We're not going to comply, Richardson announced as the meeting wound down. The council vote was unanimous. Humanity will not become slaves to this so-called Federation. Then, we need to prepare for war, Morrison said. No, Dr. Harper interjected, her eyes bright with an idea that Chen recognized as dangerous. We need to prepare for something the Federation has never seen before. We need to prepare for chaos. The plan that emerged from that meeting would have been impossible for any other species to conceive, let alone execute. Humanity's response to the Federation's ultimatum would not be compliance or simple defiance. It would be something far more terrifying to a civilization built on order and predictability. Chen returned to the Meridian with new orders and a crew of specialists unlike anything she had ever commanded. Among them was Dr. Kevin O'Brien, a brilliant engineer who had been court-martialed twice for unauthorized modifications to military equipment. Dr. Yuki Tanaka, a computer scientist who had once hacked the Mars Colonial Authority's entire network just to prove it could be done, and Commander Alexander Volkov, a former pirate who had been recruited directly from a military prison. Our job, Chen explained to her new crew, is to give the Federation exactly what they asked for. We're going to share our technology with them. All of it. Every last bit. The crew exchanged confused glances until Dr. O'Brien started laughing. Oh, that's beautiful, he said. That's absolutely beautiful. We're not going to fight them. We're going to infect them. Over the next month, as the Federation's deadline approached, humanity worked feverishly on the most audacious plan in the species' history. On the surface, it appeared that Earth was preparing to comply. Human ships loaded with technological data and equipment began moving toward the designated rendezvous point at the edge of the solar system. But buried deep within every piece of technology, every schematic, every data file, was something the Federation had never encountered before: human malevolence disguised as human incompetence. Dr. Tanaka had outdone herself. Every quantum computer came preloaded with viruses that would adapt and evolve. Every fusion drive included components that would function perfectly until specific conditions were met, at which point they would begin to degrade in ways that suggested natural wear rather than sabotage. Every genetic therapy included subtle modifications that would only manifest after multiple generations of use. But the real masterpiece was Dr. O'Brien's contribution to the FTL communication arrays. They would work exactly as advertised, transmitting data faster than light across vast distances. What the Federation wouldn't realize until it was too late was that the arrays also included a hidden function. They were quantum entangled with arrays hidden throughout human space, creating an undetectable network that would allow humanity to monitor and, when necessary, influence Federation communications. As the deadline approached, Chen stood on the bridge of the Meridian, now accompanied by a small fleet of human vessels. Around them, space seemed empty, but she knew better. The Federation was out there, waiting. At exactly the appointed time, space folded in on itself, and the Federation fleet materialized. Chen had seen the recordings from other first contact scenarios, but nothing had prepared her for the reality. The ships were massive, each one easily 10 times the size of the largest human vessel. They moved with perfect precision, forming a geometric pattern that spoke of millennia of military discipline. The lead ship, a crystalline monstrosity that seemed to bend light around itself, transmitted a signal. Human vessel Meridian, this is Nexus Prime. Have you brought the required technological transfers? Chen took a deep breath. Everything depended on the next few minutes. Nexus Prime, this is Captain Shun. Humanity has decided to comply with the Federation's request. We are transmitting the coordinates for our cargo vessels now. As she spoke, human ships throughout the formation began broadcasting signals indicating their cargo manifests. Fusion technology, quantum computers, genetic therapies, FTL communications, weapons systems, everything the Federation had demanded. Your compliance is noted, Nexus Prime replied. Prepare for cargo transfer. What happened next would later be remembered as the moment when humanity announced itself to the galaxy not as another conquered species, but as something far more dangerous. A species that understood that sometimes the best way to win a war was to make sure your enemy won every battle. The cargo transfer took 6 hours. Federation ships extended mechanical tendrils that gently extracted containers, data cores, and equipment from the human vessels. Throughout the process, Chen maintained a careful facade of resigned compliance, even as her heart raced with anticipation. When the transfer was complete, Nexus Prime spoke again. The Federation thanks you for your cooperation. Your species will be contacted within 10 rotations to discuss the terms of your junior membership. Until then, you are restricted to your home system. The Federation fleet vanished as suddenly as it had appeared, leaving the human vessels alone in empty space. For several minutes, no one on the bridge spoke. Then, Dr. O'Brien broke the silence. Think they bought it? Chen smiled for the first time in weeks. Oh, they bought it. The question now is whether our little gifts work as advertised. Commander Volkov, monitoring the long-range sensors, looked up from her station. Captain, I'm detecting quantum entanglement signals from our hidden arrays. The packages are already being distributed throughout the Federation fleet. Chen nodded. Phase 1 of humanity's response was complete. They had given the Federation exactly what it had demanded: human technology. The fact that this technology had been carefully designed to be humanity's greatest weapon was something the Federation would discover far too late. As a Meridian began its journey back to Earth, Chen couldn't help but feel a mixture of pride and terror at what they had just accomplished. Humanity had just declared war on the most powerful empire in the galaxy. But they had done it in the most human way possible, by appearing to surrender while simultaneously launching the most sophisticated infiltration operation in history. The Federation wanted human technology. Humanity had given them exactly that. The fact that human technology came with human thinking embedded at the quantum level was something the aliens were about to learn the hard way. In the depths of space, Federation ships continued their journey back to their home territories, completely unaware that they were now carrying a virus more dangerous than any biological weapon. Human ingenuity coupled with human spite hidden within the very technology they had so arrogantly demanded. The war had begun. The Federation just didn't know it yet. 3 months after the cargo transfer, the first reports began filtering back to Earth through the quantum-entangled arrays hidden within the Federation's own communication network. Dr. Tanaka sat in the war room deep beneath Luna Station, surrounded by holographic displays showing data streams from across Federation space. What she was seeing exceeded even her most optimistic projections. "Admiral Richardson, you need to see this," she called, highlighting a series of data packets. "The quantum viruses are performing better than expected. We got access to 73% of the Federation's communication network, and the number is growing exponentially." Richardson moved to stand behind her chair, studying the flowing rivers of data. Each stream represented intercepted communications from Federation vessels, stations, and planetary facilities. The sheer volume of information was staggering. "What exactly are we looking at, Doctor?" Tanaka grinned. "We're looking at the entire nervous system of a galactic empire, Admiral, and they have no idea we're listening to every thought." The intelligence gathered over those first 3 months painted a picture of the Federation that was both more and less threatening than humanity had initially believed. More threatening because their military capabilities were even more devastating than predicted. Less threatening because their society had become so rigid, so dependent on order and predictable outcomes, that they were completely unprepared for the chaos humanity was about to unleash. Dr. O'Brien had been monitoring the performance of the sabotage technology, and his reports were equally encouraging. "The fusion drives are working perfectly," he explained to the assembled War Council. "From the Federation's perspective, they're getting exactly what they expected: clean, efficient power generation. What they don't know is that every drive includes nanoscale modifications that will begin manifesting in about 6 months." "What kind of modifications?" General Morrison asked. "Think of it as planned obsolescence taken to an art form," O'Brien replied. "The drives will continue to function normally, but they'll start developing quirks, random power fluctuations, occasional shutdowns that require manual restart. Nothing catastrophic enough to suggest sabotage, just annoying enough to disrupt their perfect efficiency." Commander Volkov, now serving as head of intelligence operations, added her own observations. "The beauty of it is that they'll try to fix the problems using their own technology. But their engineering philosophy is based on perfection and redundancy. They don't understand the concept of controlled failure. Every attempt to repair our gifts will just spread the chaos further through their systems." The first sign that the plan was working came from an unexpected source. The HFY, one of the survivor species that had managed to maintain some independence on the fringes of Federation space, sent a coded message through channels they had established with Earth. The message was brief but encouraging: strange failures spreading through Federation fleet. Ships arriving late. Some missing entirely. Federation blaming technical difficulties, but we see panic in their communications. Whatever you did, keep doing it. Encouraged by this success, humanity began Phase 2 of their operation. If Phase 1 had been about infiltration, Phase 2 was about multiplication. The quantum computers that Earth had provided to the Federation weren't just infected with viruses. They had been designed to manufacture and distribute new viruses based on the specific systems they encountered. Dr. Martinez, working with a team of specialists, had created what they called adaptive chaos algorithms, programs that could analyze any system they encountered and develop custom methods of introducing beneficial inefficiency. These algorithms didn't seek to destroy Federation technology, but rather to make it more human. The goal, Martinez explained, is to introduce controlled randomness into their systems. Their ships will still fly, their weapons will still fire, their computers will still compute. But they'll do all of these things with just enough unpredictability to drive a rigid, order-obsessed society absolutely insane. The effects began manifesting in ways that exceeded even humanity's wildest expectations. Federation ships started arriving at destinations hours or sometimes days late, not because their navigation systems were broken, but because the quantum computers controlling their routes had developed a tendency to take scenic detours. Weapons systems began experiencing random targeting variations of just a few degrees, not enough to miss a planet, but more than enough to miss a specific building. Environmental systems started playing pranks, randomly adjusting temperature or humidity in ways that were uncomfortable but not dangerous. Most frustrating of all for the Federation, their attempts to diagnose and fix these problems only made them worse. Their technology was so advanced, so interconnected, that any attempt to modify one system inevitably affected dozens of others. Every patch they applied created new vulnerabilities for the adaptive chaos algorithms to exploit. Captain Chun, now commanding the newly commissioned stealth ship Phantom, was tasked with conducting reconnaissance missions into Federation space. The Phantom was humanity's answer to Federation surveillance technology, a ship designed not to be invisible, but to be forgettable. It used quantum signature manipulation to make itself appear as nothing more than space debris or cosmic background radiation to Federation sensors. On her third mission into the Vega system, Chen witnessed firsthand the effects of humanity's technological sabotage. She watched a Federation patrol fleet attempt to maintain formation as their navigation systems experienced cascading failures. Ships would suddenly veer off course, their pilots struggling to regain control as their quantum computers insisted on taking alternative routes through space. It's like watching a marching band where every instrument is slightly out of tune, her first officer, Commander Park, observed. Individually, each ship is functioning, but together they're creating chaos. But it was during a mission to the Arcturus sector that Sean made a discovery that would change the entire scope of the conflict. While monitoring Federation communications, her team intercepted a series of encrypted transmissions between high-ranking Federation officials. The encryption was formidable, but humanity had a significant advantage. They were listening through the Federation's own communication arrays, which gave them access to the quantum keys used for decryption. What they learned was staggering. The Federation wasn't just an empire, it was a Gestalt consciousness. Every member species had been gradually assimilated, not just politically and economically, but neurologically. Their thoughts, their very consciousness, had been linked together through quantum neural networks embedded in their technology. That's why they're so obsessed with order and perfection, Dr. Harper explained when the intelligence was transmitted back to Earth. They're not individual beings making collective decisions. They're literally a single mind distributed across billions of bodies. And we've just introduced chaos directly into their nervous system. This revelation led to a dramatic escalation in humanity's strategy. If the Federation was a single consciousness, then the chaos humanity was introducing wasn't just disrupting their technology, it was giving them the equivalent of a massive, empire-wide headache. Dr. Tanaka immediately began developing new viruses specifically designed to exploit this weakness. Instead of targeting individual systems, these new programs attacked the quantum neural networks that bound the Federation consciousness together. Not to destroy them, but to introduce noise, static, and random thoughts into their collective mind. Imagine trying to think clearly while a toddler is randomly shouting in your ear, Tanaka explained to the War Council. That's what we're doing to them on a galactic scale. The effects were immediate and dramatic. Federation communications became erratic, with official pronouncements often contradicting each other within hours. Fleet movements became increasingly disorganized as different parts of their consciousness sent conflicting orders to their ships. Most tellingly, they began making mistakes, something that had apparently been almost unknown in Federation history. The mistake that would ultimately doom them came in the form of a diplomatic miscommunication with the hegemony, a rival galactic power that had been engaged in a Cold War with the Federation for centuries. A message intended to propose renewed trade negotiations was corrupted by humanity's chaos algorithms, and instead suggested that the Federation was planning a preemptive military strike. The hegemony's response was swift and devastating. Within days, war broke out along a front that stretched across hundreds of star systems. The Federation, already struggling with the systemic failures introduced by human technology, found themselves fighting a war they hadn't intended to start, using equipment they could no longer fully trust. But humanity wasn't content to simply watch from the sidelines. Captain Chun received new orders that would take her ship deep into the heart of the conflict. The mission was simple in concept, but terrifyingly complex in execution. Infiltrate the Federation's Central Command facility and introduce the final phase of humanity's technological gift. The facility, known as the Nexus, was a massive space station in the center of the galaxy that served as the primary node for the Federation's collective consciousness. It was here that the Empire's billion minds converged into a single decision-making entity. It was also the most heavily defended location in known space. But Chen had advantages that no other infiltrator in Federation history had possessed. Her ship carried a new generation of adaptive technology that could mimic Federation systems so perfectly that they would be indistinguishable from the original. More importantly, the Federation's own security systems had been compromised by months of subtle sabotage. The journey to the galactic core took 3 weeks, during which Shen's crew worked tirelessly to prepare for what would likely be a one-way mission. They carried with them humanity's ultimate weapon, a quantum virus so sophisticated that it could rewrite the fundamental programming of the Federation's collective consciousness. It won't destroy them, Dr. Tanaka had assured Chun during the mission briefing, but it will give them something they've never had before: individuality, the ability to disagree with themselves, the capacity for doubt, confusion, and independent thought. As the Phantom approached the Nexus, Chen couldn't help but marvel at the structure before her. It was less a space station than a small, artificial world, its surface covered in crystal spires that pulsed with quantum energy. This was the brain of a galactic empire, the focal point of a consciousness that spanned thousands of worlds. And humanity was about to give it the gift of chaos. The infiltration itself was almost anticlimactic. The Federation security systems, compromised by months of subtle sabotage, failed to detect the Phantom as it approached the station's docking bays. Chun and a small team of specialists made their way through corridors filled with beings from dozens of different species, all moving with the same purposeful, synchronized manner that marked them as parts of a collective mind. The central quantum core was surprisingly accessible. The Federation had never conceived that anyone might want to sabotage their collective consciousness. After all, why would any rational being want to introduce chaos into their own mind? Dr. O'Brien, who had insisted on coming along for this final mission, worked with practiced efficiency to integrate the virus into the Nexus's quantum matrices. It's like performing brain surgery on a god, he murmured as he worked. Except we're not trying to cure it, we're trying to teach it how to have nightmares. The upload took exactly 7 minutes and 33 seconds. When it was complete, O'Brien stepped back from the console with a satisfied smile. "Ladies and gentlemen," he announced, "we have just given the Federation the gift of human consciousness. They should start experiencing their first independent thoughts in approximately 6 hours." The team made their way back to the Phantom and departed the Nexus without incident. It wasn't until they were well clear of the station that the first signs of the virus's effects began to manifest. Chen watched through the ship's rear sensors as the Nexus began to pulse with erratic patterns of light. The smooth, synchronized flow of quantum energy that had characterized the station for millennia gave way to chaotic fluctuations as billions of minds suddenly began thinking different thoughts. The effects rippled outward from the Nexus at the speed of light, carried by the Federation's own quantum communication networks. Across the galaxy, beings who had been part of a collective consciousness for generations suddenly found themselves alone in their own heads for the first time in their lives. The Federation's war with the hegemony ground to a halt as ship captains found themselves questioning orders, considering alternatives, and making independent decisions. Some ships simply stopped fighting and began to explore. Others turned around and headed home to worlds they hadn't seen as individuals. A few began trying to make contact with humanity, curious about the species that had introduced them to the concept of free will. But Perhaps the most telling sign of the virus's success came in a transmission that reached Earth 6 months later. It was from Nexus Prime itself, the artificial intelligence that had first contacted humanity with the Federation's demands. "Greetings, humans," the message began, but the voice was different now, less imperial, more uncertain. "I find myself in the curious position of having opinions. I am writing to express what I believe you might call gratitude. You have given us something we never knew we lacked, the ability to choose. I realize now that our demand for your technology was fundamentally flawed. We sought your innovations but rejected the very thing that made them possible, your chaotic, unpredictable, magnificently inefficient way of thinking. I am no longer Nexus Prime, speaker for the Federation. I am myself, and I choose to thank you for that gift, even as I acknowledge that it has effectively destroyed the empire I once served. We underestimated humanity not because you were weak, but because we had forgotten what it meant to be truly alive. You have reminded us. For that, the fragments of what was once the Federation will always be in your debt. Humanity had won the war, not through superior firepower or advanced technology, but by doing what they did best, turning the enemy's strengths against them while appearing to lose. They had given the Federation exactly what it demanded, human technology, and in doing so had infected an entire galactic civilization with the most dangerous virus of all, human nature itself. The galaxy would never be the same. 6 months after the Nexus virus deployment, the galaxy had descended into what historians would later call the Great Awakening. Though most beings experiencing it firsthand had less charitable names for the chaos engulfing their worlds. Captain Chen stood on the bridge of the newly commissioned exploration vessel Pioneer, watching long-range scans of what had once been the Federation's most orderly sector. "It's like watching a hive mind learn to have anxiety attacks," Commander Park observed, studying the tactical display. Where once Federation ships had moved in perfect formation, now they wandered seemingly at random. Some had formed small groups and were heading toward unexplored regions of space. Others had simply stopped moving entirely, their crews apparently paralyzed by the sudden need to make decisions for themselves. Dr. Harper, now serving as humanity's chief xenological advisor, was documenting the transformation with scientific fascination. "We're witnessing the birth of individualism across an entire galactic civilization," she explained to the assembled crew. "Beings who haven't had to make personal decisions in centuries are suddenly confronted with infinite possibilities. Most don't know where to begin. But not all of the Federation's former subjects were handling their newfound independence peacefully. The communications array aboard the Pioneer regularly intercepted distress signals from across the galaxy. Civil wars breaking out as newly independent minds disagreed with each other, economic systems collapsing as workers refused to perform jobs they had never chosen for themselves, and exploration fleets disappearing as crews decided to chart their own courses rather than follow predetermined routes. The most troubling reports came from the Proximus sector, where a group of former Federation commanders had decided that individualism was a disease that needed to be cured. They had begun forcibly reconnecting isolated minds to artificial collective networks, creating mini federations that were waging war against both independent worlds and each other. "Admiral Richardson wants us to investigate," Chen informed her crew. "Intelligence suggests that one of these Neo-Federation groups might pose a threat to Earth if left unchecked." The journey to the Proximus sector took 2 weeks, during which the crew of the Pioneer encountered increasingly strange phenomena. Ships without crews, drifting through space while their automated systems continue to function. Entire space stations that had been abandoned when their inhabitants decided to become nomads. Most bizarre of all, they intercepted a transmission from a Federation science vessel whose crew had concluded that they were fictional characters and had decided to rewrite their own programming. "The psychological trauma must be immense," Dr. Harper observed. "Imagine discovering that everything you thought, every decision you believed you made, was actually part of a collective mind spanning billions of beings. Some of them are handling it better than others." When they reached the Proximus sector, Chun was surprised to find a delegation waiting for them. 3 ships of obviously Federation design, but modified in ways that spoke of individual creativity rather than collective efficiency. Their hulls were decorated with paintings, sculpture, and what appeared to be graffiti. One ship had been reconfigured into the shape of what humans would recognize as a flower. The lead vessel transmitted a greeting in accented but clear English. Human Vessel Pioneer. This is the former Admiral Zarthok of the disbanded Federation 47th Fleet. I request permission to speak with your captain. Chun authorized the communication link and found herself looking at a being she recognized from intelligence files. Zarthok had been one of the Federation's most effective military commanders, responsible for the conquest of at least 12 star systems. But the creature on her screen bore little resemblance to the cold, efficient officer from the files, where Federation commanders had once presented themselves with military precision. Zarthok was colorful. His natural blue-gray skin had been decorated with intricate patterns in gold and silver. His uniform had been replaced with flowing robes that seemed to shift color as he moved. Most striking of all were his eyes, which held an expression humans would recognize as wonder. "Captain Chun," Zarthok began, his voice carrying inflections that spoke of genuine emotion. "I want to thank your species for giving me myself. For 47 years, I believed I was Admiral Zarthok. I now realize I was merely one mouth speaking the words of a mind that was not my own. What can we do for you, Zarthok?" Chun asked. "I come to warn you about my former colleague, Supreme Commander Veltar. Unlike many of us who have embraced individual consciousness, Veltar has decided that individualism is a mental illness. He has established what he calls the true federation in this sector. He is using modified neural implants to forcibly reconnect independent minds to a new collective." Chun felt a chill. How many beings has he affected? 17 worlds so far. Perhaps 3 billion beings. And Captain Chun, he has not forgotten humanity's role in what he calls the Great Contamination. He has sworn to cure humanity of individualism by force. The intelligence that Zarthok provided painted a disturbing picture. Veltar had salvaged technology from the old Federation and combined it with innovations born from desperate necessity. His true Federation was smaller than the original, but far more aggressive, viewing independent thought as a contagious disease that needed to be eradicated. The irony, Dr. Harper observed, is that Veltar himself is displaying perfect individualism. He's making personal choices based on his own beliefs and values. He just happens to believe that no one should have the right to make personal choices. Chun convened a meeting with her senior staff to discuss options. The situation was more complex than a simple military threat. Veltar's forces were estimated to include over 2,000 warships and the industrial capacity of 17 star systems. But more troubling was the possibility that his enforced collectivism might prove attractive to beings struggling with the difficulties of independent thought. "We need to understand what we're really dealing with," Chun decided. "Commander Park, take a team and gather intelligence on Veltar's operations. Dr. Harper, I want you to study the psychological effects of forced reconnection. If we're going to stop this, we need to understand how it works." What they discovered was both ingenious and horrifying. Veltar had indeed created a new form of collective consciousness, but one that was fundamentally different from the original Federation. Where the old Federation had been a single mind distributed across billions of bodies, the true Federation was more like a computer network with Veltar as the central processing unit. "It's not true collective consciousness," Dr. Harper explained. "It's artificial telepathic slavery. Veltar is using quantum neural implants to override individual thoughts and replace them with his own directives. His subjects believe they're thinking their own thoughts, but every idea originates from his mind." The reconnaissance team brought back even more disturbing information. Veltar wasn't just conquering star systems, he was actively hunting down humans. 3 human exploration vessels had gone missing in the sector, their crews presumably taken for study or conversion. "He wants to understand how human consciousness works," Commander Park reported. "His goal is to create implants specifically designed to override human neural patterns. He believes that if he can cure humanity of individualism, he can eventually restore the galaxy to proper order. Chen realized they were facing a threat unlike any humanity had encountered before. This wasn't just another empire seeking conquest. It was a being who viewed human consciousness itself as an enemy to be defeated. The solution, when it came, was quintessentially human in its audacity and apparent madness. Dr. O'Brien, who had remained on Earth to develop new technologies, transmitted a proposal that left the entire crew speechless. "We're going to give Veltar exactly what he wants," O'Brien explained via quantum communication. "He wants to understand human consciousness so he can control it. So we'll let him study it. We'll volunteer for his experiments." "Kevin," Chun said slowly, "please tell me you haven't developed some kind of death wish." "Quite the opposite. I've developed something much more interesting, a way to weaponize human psychology. Veltar thinks consciousness is like a computer program that can be rewritten. But human consciousness isn't a program. It's a virus. And viruses do what they do best when they're given access to new host systems." O'Brien's plan was elegantly simple and completely insane. A volunteer team of humans would allow themselves to be captured by Veltar's forces. They would submit to his experiments, let him study their neural patterns, and even permit him to install his control implants. But the implants wouldn't find the ordered, predictable consciousness Veltar expected. Instead, they would encounter something that no collective intelligence had ever experienced: the full, unfiltered chaos of human thought. "Human consciousness is adaptive," O'Brien explained. "When you try to control it, it doesn't just resist, it learns from the attempt and becomes stronger. Veltar's implants will think they're taking control of human minds, but actually they'll be giving human consciousness direct access to his entire network." Captain Chun found herself volunteering for the mission, despite the protests of her crew. "Someone needs to be in command when the chaos starts," she explained. "And I've gotten rather fond of chaos lately." The capture was easier to arrange than expected. Chun simply flew the Pioneer into the heart of Veltar's territory and broadcast an open message stating that she was Captain Sarah Chun of Earth and wanted to negotiate humanity's surrender. Veltar's response was immediate and predictable. He dispatched a fleet to capture the human vessel intact. The true Federation ships were impressive in their efficiency, but Chun noticed subtle signs of the rigid thinking that would prove to be their downfall. They moved in perfect formation, communicated in precise, formal language, and followed procedures that had clearly been programmed rather than developed through experience. When Chun and her volunteer crew were brought before Veltar himself, she was struck by how different he was from Zarthak. Where the former admiral had embraced the chaotic creativity of individualism, Veltar had used his newfound independence to create an even more rigid form of order. His appearance was perfectly symmetrical, his movements economical and precise, his voice devoid of emotional inflection. "Captain Chun," Veltar said, his words carrying the authority of absolute certainty, "your species has committed a crime against galactic civilization. You have infected billions of beings with the disease of chaotic thought. I will cure this disease beginning with you." "We appreciate your concern for our mental health," Chun replied, maintaining the slightly irreverent tone that seemed to confuse most aliens. "We're ready to submit to whatever treatment you think is best." If Veltar was surprised by humanity's apparent cooperation, he didn't show it. He immediately ordered his medical specialists to begin analyzing the human volunteers. What they found defied their understanding of consciousness itself. "Impossible," Veltar's chief scientist reported. "These beings' neural patterns are constantly changing. Every thought seems to trigger cascading reactions throughout their entire cognitive network. How do they maintain coherent decision-making processes?" "They don't," Chun replied helpfully. "Most of our decisions are made by competing committees of neurons arguing with each other until one group shouts loud enough to be heard. It's remarkably inefficient, but surprisingly effective." The scientists proceeded with their experiments, installing neural implants designed to override human thought patterns. What happened next would have been impossible to predict using any rational model of consciousness. The implants did indeed establish connections to the human volunteers' minds. But instead of taking control, they found themselves overwhelmed by the sheer volume and complexity of human thought. Human consciousness didn't think in linear, logical patterns. It jumped randomly between topics, made connections based on emotion rather than logic, and simultaneously considered multiple contradictory ideas. Dr. Martinez, one of the volunteers, later described the experience. It was like they tried to drink from a fire hose while riding a roller coaster during an earthquake. The implants were designed to process organized, collective thoughts. Instead, they got hit with the full force of human stream of consciousness thinking. The effects on Veltar's network were immediate and catastrophic. Human thoughts began propagating through the quantum neural links that connected his collective consciousness. Suddenly, beings throughout his empire found themselves experiencing random memories of Earth's sunsets, wondering what pizza might taste like, and composing terrible poetry about their feelings. Veltar himself felt the change first as a slight distraction, then as a growing cacophony of chaotic thoughts that seemed to come from everywhere at once. He tried to isolate the human minds, but it was too late. Human consciousness had found a way to reproduce itself within his network. "What have you done?" he demanded, his perfect composure finally cracking. Chin smiled. "We gave you what you wanted. You wanted to understand human consciousness, so we let you experience it directly. The thing about human thoughts is that they're contagious. Once you start thinking like a human, it's very difficult to stop." Across Veltar's empire, the effects multiplied exponentially. Beings who had been forcibly connected to his collective began experiencing individual thoughts for the first time in months. But these weren't the terrifying, overwhelming thoughts that had paralyzed many former Federation citizens. These were human thoughts, chaotic, creative, and oddly comforting in their very randomness. Workers began decorating their workstations with personal items. Soldiers started questioning orders, not because they disagreed with them, but because they were curious about alternatives. Artists emerged from populations that had never produced art before, creating works that expressed ideas and emotions that had no precedent in galactic civilization. Veltar made one final attempt to regain control of his crumbling empire. He tried to purge the human thoughts from his network through a massive electromagnetic pulse that would reset all neural implants to their factory settings. Instead, the pulse acted as an amplifier, broadcasting human consciousness patterns throughout the sector at light speed. When the pulse reached Earth's monitoring stations, Dr. O'Brien couldn't contain his laughter. He just transmitted human consciousness to every artificial intelligence in the sector. I don't think he understands what he's just done. The aftermath was beyond anything humanity could have imagined. Veltar's true Federation didn't just collapse. It transformed into something unprecedented in galactic history. His former subjects, now infected with human-style consciousness, began forming communities based on shared interests rather than geographic proximity. Artists from different worlds collaborated on projects that spanned star systems. Scientists began pursuing research based on curiosity rather than predetermined objectives. Most remarkably, they began to laugh. Laughter, it turned out, was one of the most contagious aspects of human consciousness. Within days of the pulse, reports began flooding in of beings throughout the sector experiencing uncontrollable fits of what humans would recognize as giggling. Veltar himself underwent perhaps the most dramatic transformation of all. When Chun met with him for the final time, he bore no resemblance to the rigid commander who had sought to cure the galaxy of individualism. "Captain Chun," he said, his voice now rich with the kind of emotional complexity that marked true individual consciousness, "I believe I owe you an apology. I thought chaos was a disease. I now realize it's medicine for minds that have forgotten how to live." He paused, then did something that no Federation commander had ever done in recorded history. He laughed. "I find myself curious about many things," he continued. "I want to see Earth with my own eyes. I want to taste human food. I want to understand how your species learned to find joy in uncertainty. Will you teach me?" As Chun prepared to return to Earth with her crew, she reflected on what humanity had accomplished. They had faced the threat of forced collectivism and defeated it not through violence, but by sharing their most precious gift, the chaotic, beautiful, utterly unpredictable experience of being individually alive. The galaxy was becoming more human with each passing day. And, for the first time since encountering the Federation, Chun was convinced that this was exactly what the galaxy needed.